Everything that I'm teaching you has to do with you. It's always about what can you take out of the scriptures as I teach it that you can use in your transformation from what you are to what he is, and also the things you need to be careful to avoid and the things you need to be careful to make sure you add. In other words, what you're adding to you and what you want to make sure to keep away from you. Some of the things we're talking about here is what causes you to be susceptible to act like a Satan or a devil? What causes you to be susceptible to that influence? And what does it actually look like? So here we see one of the little evidences or hints is that Peter had a pride problem. He would be overly zealous. We talked about how the pendulum of Peter would swing very wide, very quickly. Don't wash my feet. Oh, wash everything, you know. That didn't take really long for the pendulum to go from one side to the other. And that's just who he was, right? Extremely emotionally zealous, okay? But he could just swing from one side to the other on the extremes. Even if everybody else stumbles, I won't. There's a verse that says, be careful that you think you stand lest you fall, right? So this is also a crack in the door, or at least an opening of a door for the adversary to come in and cheer you on in the wrong direction. Now remember, I did teach you that he can't work with something that's not there. That was the kind of the point with Job. Yahweh said, what do you think of Job? He says, I got nothing to work with. He said, yeah, I know. That's why I asked you to see what you think about him. But he said, oh, but that's because you spoil him. He said, fine, I'll prove that's wrong. Take it all away. But we got to be careful with our overly zealousness. I've got a bunch of people that are not here right now that when they were here, man, they were over the top zealous. Didn't last very long. Matter of fact, my wife and I used to have this thing. Somebody would come to the congregation to visit, and this especially when we first started back 25 years ago, 26 years ago, they would come in, and at the end of the service, they'd come up and say, this is amazing. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. This is the best thing since sliced bread. And I knew they were never coming back. You know, I've often told you the story of my little delusion of how things went in the beginning, right? John 1:1 says, in the beginning was Elohim, and there was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, the Word was Elohim. So I picture this discussion between the Father and Son before anything even existed. Again, these are not literal, like father, son, right? We know they're not human, that we understand, but it's kind of picturing the roles that we would understand, right? So I picture the son like a son going, hey, Dad, I want to build something. I want to make something. And the father's like, okay, what do you want to make? I want to make this and that. And okay, great. And he talks about human beings, and they decide they want to make human beings and everything. He said, look, your plan is great, except you understand they're going to screw it up. And for it to get ultimately where you wanted to get it, you're going to have to be willing to die for them. Because he says he was slain from before the foundation of the earth, right? It was decreed, and he knew this from the beginning. They went through the whole thing and said, remember the end from the beginning, they can know, okay, if you do this, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. Is that are you willing to do all that? I'm the greatest of all of you, and look, I'm going to take the lowest position and wash all your feet. Okay, that was a big picture for them. And that's why Peter was like, oh, no. You're the Messiah. Why would you wash my feet? Peter, I just washed all of their feet. What do you're not first, right? He didn't start with Peter. It's like, come on. What does it prove? He didn't get it. What's it prove when you have your same problems? You don't get it. There's so much of this that we prove we just don't get yet. Are you humble enough to recognize that there's things you don't get yet? It also is why you need teaching. Because I promise you again, you don't have to like this, you were never designed or intended to understand this book fully without help. You can understand it partially without help. Some of it you can understand very clearly without help. He wrote in parables though. Even the students that he lived with had to ask him, that thing you just said, what did that mean? What is that all about? Explain it to us. Remember, he's laying this out. He had the cup, he had the bread, they did the Kiddush and m.t.o.i. He gave it a different, higher understanding. He did not establish communion. Okay, the Catholic Church invented that. Or I should say they invented that spin on what actually happened. Okay, if you look back in Genesis, there was a guy named Melchizedek who sat down with Abram after he had a victory, and Abram and the two of them had wine and bread. This is a tradition that you see all the way to Yeshua, all the way till today. The Jews still do this. Okay, it's called Kiddush and m.t.o.i, the Kiddush being the wine, the m.t.o.i being the bread. These are fellowship rituals, we'll call it, right? It's a tradition for fellowship. So Yeshua and the brethren were doing something they always did when they got together in fellowship. They had bread and wine, which was, by the way, the core staple of every meal in those days. He said, I prayed for you that your belief should not fail. By the way, you guys will call us up sometimes and want us to pray against Satan or against some demon, he said, I prayed for you to not fail. He didn't say I prayed for Satan not to bother you. Don't worry about it. Satan has asked you, but I prayed against him, so he's going to leave you alone. No, he said I prayed that your belief would not fail. You need to be tested. Every time we go through things like this, I always go back to Deuteronomy 8:2, which says that the Israelites, like you, were led through a wilderness for a period of time to humble them. Peter needed some humbling. And to test them, to see whether it was in their heart to keep commandments. That's a test I think we all have to pass. You're not getting into the kingdom without passing the Deuteronomy 8:2 test. Now, the expectation is not that you're going to be perfect. The expectation is you're going to make the effort to be perfect. And that when you're not, you're going to make the effort to repent fully and quickly. How many of you are willing to admit, who've been in this more than, let's say you've been in this more than 5 years, and even if you've been less, that when you first started trying to do this walk, you got all excited about some aspect of Torah observance, only to find out that as you were excited about it, you had it wrong. You had some aspect of it wrong. There are people that figure that, okay, so Shabbat means that I'm not going to go to work. Okay, that is part of it. But then you end up doing all kinds of things you enjoy doing, and you're playing games and watching TV but I'm not working. Some of you got zealous about some of the Torah, and then started really sharing that because you were excited about it and still had it wrong. Don't do that. Make sure before you vomit out and get all excited and sound like Peter getting overzealous that you actually know what you're talking about, which might take more than 5 minutes. Yeshua knew what was coming, but you know what? Knowing what was coming before he was in a flesh suit was different than being in a flesh suit. So he already knew this was gonna hurt. He knew it was coming, and he said, look, if there's any other way to do this, but yet your desire I'm gonna do. So I don't want you to think he was having a weak moment. He was having a reality moment. He was in a flesh suit. That flesh suit feels pain and can suffer and can die. No, Yeshua didn't have a moment of weakness here. He had a reality of, I need to have a little talk with you and say, you know what, now that I'm down here, I'm not against this. Is there any other way though? And no, by the way, that's your life too. Okay, a lot of you when you were single, all of a sudden now at some point you wanted to get married. Whatever you thought it was, you got married and realized, oh. And maybe it was, oh. Some of it is better than you thought, and some of it is not better than you thought. But you can't really know until you are, right? The Spirit is indeed eager. So it means when your nature, his nature is in you, that nature of his is eager. And that connection of you wanting to be like him is eager to do. He says, but the flesh is weak. And so that spirit, the Ruach, is dwelling in a flesh suit at the moment. And your flesh suit is weak. And not just weak, meaning it's physically weak and falls asleep. It's easily distracted. It's easily tempted. It's easily upset. It's easily disappointed. All the negative things you can think of. The flesh is what does all that. The spirit is what? Love, joy, peace, patience. The flesh is the other stuff. Just remember, when he's talking about here, he's giving you a picture. He's using idiomatic ideas here or metaphors. He's saying, look, I told you to do something. If you pray and pay attention to do that, because you said, oh, I'm zealous, whatever. I'm willing to die even for you. I'm willing to do all. He said, yeah, you're all excited about that. And that's because you got the right spirit in you. But you still have flesh that you haven't overcome. And that's the weakness. All right, so hopefully we're starting to really see more and more of how let me start the sentence again. Lots and lots of us have always been worried about what the devil was doing. What is the devil doing? What's he trying to do to me? What's the devil doing? I want you to be more concerned with, are you behaving in the devil form or the Satan form? I'm much more concerned that you need to understand how you can be acting like that so that you're not called a Satan or a devil the way other human beings were called that, including apostles. Peter, a few times here, Judas. And so we can fall into that. You can be that. Let's not do that, all right? Let's take it serious. How do you avoid all that? Watch and pray always. Be awake, be aware, and vertically connected. Amen?